All right, what's up, everybody, and welcome. My name is Saxon. As you know, I am the camera class teacher and host. Today is a really exciting day. It's one of my favorites. It is basic camera class. Woo! So today is November the 3rd, and we are going to be getting into it in a little bit here. Let me switch over to my presentation mode. Wrong one. There we go. Guys, as always, you know what to do. If you have any questions while we're going through, please feel free to ask. Let me pull up my questions. Actually, it should let me. Oh, wait, where's my chat? That's not what I need here. Well, either way, I'm going to look on how to do this, but welcome everybody. My name is Saxon. As always, I'm here to teach. We'll be doing camera basics in a little bit here. I just need to pull up a couple more things to get situated. I got into the room a little bit late, but we'll give it another 5 or 6 minutes. Let some others join, but today's a long one. As always, we're going to go through the basics on how to use your camera to shoot automatic, and then from there, I'm going to teach you certain things to look for inside the frame. So that way you're framing things up and you're making as pretty of a picture as possible. Like always, when I figure out how to get it back on here, I'll see all the chats on there. So anybody who has questions online, feel free to chat in. At the current moment, I don't have any students in class today, so it should just be me talking to the computer today. But once I get my messages pulled up on here, I'll be able to see what you guys have for questions. So a couple more minutes here, and then we'll get started. Hey, there we go. Perfect. All right. We still, at the current moment, have a broken door in my one room, so you might hear some voices behind me. At the current moment, we're in Apt Electronics. We're here on the second floor in the Inspiration Studio. Here on the Inspiration Studio, we have a full mock-up kitchen, or multiple mock-up kitchens and living rooms and living spaces. And what's really awesome is a customer can come in and they're able to go into the space and really envision themselves and what Apt can offer for them, and also different products, and give them inspiration. One of the doors that leads from the conference room into that area is being repaired, and so in the meantime, it's wide open, so I can hear everything out there. I don't know if they can hear me, but I do apologize in advance if you hear the chatter over myself. But it is about 5:40. I said I'd give it about 5 minutes, around 5:35. So let's jump into it. Everybody, welcome to Camera Basics. All right, let's get started. So first things first, where to go when all else fails. I love talking about this. Guys, my class is awesome. I'm really happy I get to be teaching it. There's a lot of amazing classes out there, but the first and foremost thing I'm going to tell you is read that owner's manual before operating your camera. You can listen to everything I have to say. You can listen to every of your favorite YouTube pages and your YouTube creators and all this stuff, but at the end of the day, reading your manual and understanding your camera from the technical aspect is really, really important. Second thing to look at is YouTube. That's the current platform we're streaming on right now, but when I have problems with my own camera and I need to look things up, I go right to YouTube and I search the problem. 9 times out of 10, somebody out there has had something similar or experienced something similar to you, and so they've already made a video or talked about that. Masterclass is another option. Through the pandemic, there was a lot of really awesome videos that came out of Masterclass where people taught you various skills, tips, and tricks on how to either become better at something that you already love to do, turning hobbies into professions, or maybe just learning something completely fresh. So I know there's some really great Masterclass videos on photography, cinematography, movie making, writing, all sorts of stuff, art in general. So definitely worth taking a look at. But again, I do appreciate you for coming to my class, and hopefully you leave today learning something. So let's start with, where do your pictures go? You got a camera at home, or you just purchased a camera. Where do all those photos you take go? We're so used to, especially nowadays, having a cell phone where when we take a photo, it saves directly to the phone, and the phone itself has built-in memory. When you're getting a camera, none of those cameras have any built-in memory. In fact, all cameras, unless specified on the model itself, will have any sort of storage at all. Some of these smaller cameras, like DJI's action cameras and the Osmo, those guys are going to have a form of internal storage, usually somewhere like 8 gigabytes, I believe. But for the majority of them, GoPro, Sony, Nikon, Canon, Fujifilm, Olympus, Panasonic, all those guys are going to require an SD card, a compact flash, or a CF Express of some sort. And Compact Flash Express is what that stands for, but we just can call it CF Express. No matter what you do, make sure you have two. With whatever SD card you do decide to get, if you have only one and something goes wrong, you'll kick yourself because you don't have two. So I always recommend, if you're going to be going out for a day of shooting, you should always bring a second SD card just in case something fails with the first one. Rather be safe than sorry. The bitterness of poor quality remains long after sweetness of a low price is forgotten. It's one of my favorite quotes, and it pertains really well to cameras, in my opinion. The way I look at cameras versus other art forms is, in the world of painting, drawing, sculpting, you can sculpt, paint, and draw with literally anything that you can find, muster up, and afford. The world is your oyster, really, when it comes to that. With cameras, it gets a little trickier, because with a camera, we can purchase the cheapest one that they have. We can use the one on our phone, but we're always trying to achieve better quality and better images and better everything. And truly, the only way to do that with a camera is by investing money and time into it. And investing money is sometimes a hard thing for people to grasp their head around. They're always looking for good deals and good prices. But in photography, the more money that you put into your products, the typical is the better the end result will be. That's not to say everybody is. There's a lot of people out there who use older cameras that don't necessarily function as well as when they first bought them, or as well as a digital camera. But that doesn't make any of their photos less good. At a certain point, yes, it does come down to the eye of the photographer and the cinematographer. But in general, rule of thumb with camera is the more money that you can put into the product, the better end result that you'll get. Getting back into the SD cards, though, and I think it pertains to it, because when you're looking at SD cards, you want to make sure you also put a decent amount of money into a good SD card, something with good read-write speed, something with good storage, and typically something that is maybe geared towards whatever you're shooting. There are certain SD cards that are a little more tough and rugged. They're meant to be taking a beating. There's other ones that are more of a velocity, so they're better at transfer speeds. And then there's a standard run-of-the-mill that can come in various sizes and speeds. So you kind of have a mixture of the bunch. Everybody's a little different, and I do recommend doing some research into what SD card you're looking for prior to making that purchase. But your picture should not live on your SD card. You should be, as a photographer, doing one of two things. You are either transferring your photos from your SD card onto your computer, or you are taking those SD cards and you are putting them away and then continuously using more and more SD cards. There's a couple different ways you can go about it. I'll explain in the next couple slides what I mean by that, but they shouldn't only live on your memory card. I say they shouldn't live on your memory card, period, only because I think that's a waste of money, but we'll talk about that. So don't lose your pictures or damage your card. First thing you should always do, you're done taking photos, you want to remove that SD card and see what you got. You're going to turn that camera off. Wait at least 5 seconds before doing anything else, and then remove the card. There should be a slot either next to your battery or on the side of the camera is typically where you'll see it, the right or the left side, and there should be something that says card slot on there, so it signifies. Most SD cards or cards are going to push in, click, and you'll hear the click. As soon as you do, it'll either be removed or it'll be in there ready to go. Once you remove that card, place it in the card reader. I really recommend you not use your camera in order to transfer photos to the computer. Not saying it's impossible, not saying it does anything, but when you're transferring through the camera device onto the computer, you can allow for a lot of different things to happen where if something glitches on the computer, God forbid some type of electricity surge goes through your computer and fries it out, anything connected to your computer will also go out. And that could include your SD card, but that also could include that $3,000 camera that you just purchased. And I don't know about you, I would rather lose all the photos I took in one day than have to rebuy a camera for $3,000 or in any situation. But regardless, don't use your camera to take the photos out of your card or off your card. Take the physical card out, purchase that card reader. It's an $11 to $50 or $60 item, and then you can insert the SD cards into that card reader. Now, some of your older computers might have an SD card slot. A lot of the old MacBooks predating 2016 had them. Some of the HPs and Dells will still have them. If not, you can always get a card reader. These are good ideas for card readers. Depending on what you use, you want to really look into it. One of my personal favorites is the stick, this guy right here. It ends in a USB and a USB-C, and what's really nice about it is that depending on the computer setup that you have, you can plug either side in, and if it's a micro or regular SD card. Micro, you really don't have to worry about in the camera world. It's typically more for those action cameras. So GoPro would use a SD card, a drone would use a micro. A drone would use a micro SD card, a GoPro would use a micro SD card, and so on and so forth. Going to the left of that, you've got a pretty heavier, dutier unit. Allows you to plug in multiple SD cards at one time, and it has a charging port on the back end of it, so you plug in one end into your computer, do all your SD card stuff, and then you can also charge your camera or your phone at the exact same time while you're doing that. And then as you keep going, there's even more and more, and different brands are going to do different things. They're all going to do the same thing. It comes down to the brand, and it comes down to what ports they have on there for your type of SD card. Keeping it going, so once you have put that SD card into your computer, you want to copy the photos that pop up to a destination folder. Now, when we say copy photos and we say don't move copy, what we mean is you want to make sure that you are properly moving or copying photos from the SD card somewhere without fully moving them. Moving them removes them and takes them from one location and moves it to the other. If something were to transpire during that movement, you could lose all your photos. And the idea here is that we're trying to find the best practice to make sure that when we're taking our card out of the camera and we're trying to now look at what we've done, we properly take the times and the steps to go through it properly, so that way there's no hiccups or malfunctions. So copy them, don't move them into the folder. Once you see all the photos are there, this is where I was talking about earlier, save yourself the buck. Delete all those photos on that SD card. Once they've been copied over properly to the computer and you have physical confirmation that they are there. I've transferred 20,000 photos at one time from an SD card to a camera, or from an SD card to a computer. It probably took like an hour to do it all, and I basically copied them, and during the middle of that, somehow my camera or my computer shut off on itself. Now, if I were moving those, I probably would have lost a majority of those photos because of the fact that my computer kind of glitched up at some point, right? But because I was copying them, it didn't necessarily copy everything over, but it copied a good portion of them, and then I was able to then go through and copy the rest onto the computer. So when I say copy and don't move them, I'm saying that to protect yourself and to protect your images. Depending on what you're using, you're going to be either using Explorer or Finder. Both tools are available on either Mac or on Windows. And then you want to copy those photos to one more place. I call it the second place. Now, I stress this on later slides, but I'll mention it now just to get to the point. Do not only save these to your computer. And the horror story that I can relate to it with is the amount of kids when I was in college who had beautiful amounts of artwork on their computers, on their laptops that they had saved for 18 plus years or 6 years or however long they've been making work for, all to lose it in one day because of a spilled cup of coffee. So when you're getting ready to move these photos around, please copy them into another place as in an external drive. That's one that I personally use. I'm a huge fan of the external drive. I have two at home. One sits by my computer that I'm able to access at any time. The other goes directly into a safe that I keep under my bed, and I keep it there just in case the house were to ever catch fire or, God forbid, something were to happen. At least my artwork would be safe on one central drive. Prime Photos and Google Photos are a great option as well too. Both allow you to save, to store things there. They're cloud-based solutions. They're really nice for those who are on the go constantly, don't want to lug around any extra equipment such as a hard drive or I would really say just a hard drive, because everything else is pretty simple. What you can do is you can save all these photos to a cloud-based solution and then access them anywhere you are in the world. And I get a lot of people that do that with Google Drive, and I've heard Amazon has an amazing photo cloud-based solution. Personally, I've never used it, but I've heard good things. Now, once you're done with that, eject the card physically before physically removing it, and then format the card in the camera. Once you have ejected the card eject card before physically removing it. Let's start there. On your screen or on your computer, when you're getting ready to remove that card, there should be an eject symbol. For Apple, it looks like a triangle with a line then going underneath it. For Windows, I believe it is a circle icon, but it kind of goes up at one point like that. Regardless, you would click on either of those. It will then name your memory card, and then from there you can click and then have it removed from the computer. That will properly eject it, so that way, let's say your SD card wasn't completely finished transferring all the stuff. It would give you a warning message before you eject it to let you know that, hey, if you're going to do this, we'll cancel it, and then you can pull it out. That way all of your stuff is safe and nothing has the ability to get lost. Now, if you don't do that and you just eject, I can't say for certain what you will and will not lose. I can't even guarantee you will lose anything, but studies have shown, people have told me before too, that the best thing you can do is to wait, let that SD card sit for a second, and then remove it, and also properly ejecting it too is huge. Oh, and then format the card in the camera. The second part of that was don't erase it in the reader because it just takes longer. If you format the card back inside the card, you're deleting all of the images off of there already. And then on top of that too, you're formatting the card for the camera's next use, which is pretty nice. Your backup plan. So we talked about the SD card first. Then I talked about the computer. SD card to computer is probably going to be the most standard one that everybody uses, but the terabyte hard drive and the cloud next to it are representative of the other storages. Cloud storage, again, is one of the most popular storage solutions right now. Millions and millions of data is stored above us in the cloud-based area or in servers all around the world. And from there, we have access to that no matter where we're at. It's a really beautiful thing, and it's an easy thing to use too once you get it. The hard drive is very old school, and it's my personal favorite because I like the idea of having all of my stuff safe on one tangible device. And keeping the one inside my safe also makes me feel better at night, just so that way, if anything were to happen, I'm protected. But I would say, out of the bunch, pick 3. You should at least be doing... Well, you should pick 2. You should at least have 2 ways to store. Your first way of storage could be leaving it on your SD card, purchasing more SD cards as you go, and then putting it on your computer. That's fine. Not my personal favorite, but doable. One might even say that they have the SD card or they have the computer and the hard drive. Some might say they have the computer and the cloud. Some might say they have the hard drive in the cloud. I don't know why you would really have that, but you might. Now, trying cloud-based solutions, I just mentioned Google Drive. Great resource, great product. Very easy to use, and all you need is a Gmail to get started with that. If you get to a certain point where you're going over on your limit, then you're able to pay for extra storage on there. So you can store as much as you really want on Drive, depending on what you pay for and what you don't. OneDrive is done through Microsoft. It's a great program. There's a lot of good cloud-based storage options on there. And then obviously Adobe Creative Cloud, my personal favorite, just because you have access to things like Photoshop, Lightroom, InDesign, some of the big editing tools when it comes to cameras. So a tour of your camera.
Hello.
Hi there.
Wow.
Welcome in.
Are you the guy?
I am the guy.
And no one's here.
Yeah.
Well, me, late.
We teach online and in person. So you are here in person, so you can have a seat wherever you want, and then we do both.
Didn't know about the online.
Oh, you're
thing.
good.
I'm Amy, by the way.
Nice to meet you, Amy. Saxon.
Sorry?
Saxon.
Saxon.
Yes.
Gotcha. Where do you want me?
Anywhere you want. I'll be teaching on this, and then it's all online too, so you're good however.
Okay, you guys have already started?
Yeah, but we didn't get too far on it. We were just talking about memory cards, some storage-based solutions, good ways to basically store your photos. So real quick, I'll just jump back to it. These were what we talked about, so your backup plan. I recommend choosing two options out of the list. Mm-hmm. You have your SD card. That's the first way that the photos are being saved. So you're using the camera, taking the photo, saves to the SD card. My school of thought from here is that you should physically remove the SD card, put it into a reader, and that plugs into the computer. Mm-hmm. From there, it'll populate on the physical computer, and then you can remove the images that you want. Now, when I want to take them off the SD card, I want to copy them and not move them from the SD card. Mm-hmm. So there should be a quick button to copy them over to the computer rather than move them. Doing that will basically make a duplicate copy onto the computer and also keep it on the SD card. Okay. You're doing that for just the risk of exactly if anything were to happen where the photos don't transfer, you could lose them in between that transfer.
Sure.
So this is a good way of doing that. From there, the other two options would be storing them on your computer, which I think is a great option, but I also recommend having either an external hard drive or a cloud-based solution. Mm-hmm. I personally use two external hard drives for all of my artwork. One lives next to my computer, the other lives in a safe in case anything happened to my house.
Okay. So are you backing that up?
I back up, so I take everything from the SD card, I put it onto the computer. From the computer, I edit and I go through what photos I actually want.
Yeah.
Then I save everything onto my primary hard drive, and then I save everything onto my secondary hard drive too. So I have two.
Your external drive.
Yes, I have two external drives plugged into my computer at the same time,
and I put it in both places.
Both places. Because if anything, let's say my house burnt down or something, you would lose everything. And if I have it in the safe,
you don't have it on the cloud.
No, I don't like the cloud personally. It's just because after a certain amount of storage on there, you have to pay.
Yeah.
And I would rather. I'm a tangible person. I like to have physical objects.
I know, me too.
So the hard drive is a really nice option for me. So I have two hard drives at home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got it everywhere too.
For sure.
Can I ask a question while you're doing this thing? So I don't know why, but I couldn't get this thing to go directly into my computer. Like usually, if I plug in my camera to my computer, the computer saw the camera. Yeah. It came up, but nothing populated.
Do you have an SD card in there?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Is there and I thought, well, maybe I've got something turned off.
Did you turn the camera on when it was plugged in?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you did all the right steps, so there could have been something that I would have to see that I'm missing.
I guess I would say, could you take a look at it? Because
I mean,
really annoying.
I wouldn't really have a way of doing it without having a physical computer to plug that guy into. I don't know if my work computer would let me plug an external device into it.
Sure. Well, I don't know if you want to do that. I get that. But I was wondering if you looked at it. Are there settings that
There shouldn't be any other settings on the camera that would prevent from that. But personally, I would recommend putting it into a reader.
That's what I did.
Physically.
The reader is I don't know. It's like some tchotchke thing I got from wherever.
Totally fine. It'll absolutely work.
And it didn't work at first, and then all of a sudden it worked. And that's really a bummer. Like my other camera, I plugged it in, downloaded it, it's all good. This, it's been touch and go. I was, like, what am I going to do if I can't get this?
Yeah.
Because I had a project. I shot for a job, and I needed the images, and I couldn't get them off.
Yeah. I would have to see it like in action to really understand it. There should not be any settings on the physical, especially with the EOS R series right now.
Okay.
There shouldn't be any settings that you need to change on there. Right out of the box, you should be able to plug in. It could have been, number one, it could be that the card reader might be a little bit chintzy, like you're saying, so getting something a little bit nicer might at least help.
Well, the
if it
card
didn't work
reader
at first.
eventually is what worked for me.
Yeah.
But the plug, it's a USB-C or whatever.
Yeah.
And it goes from the camera directly
just
into
wouldn't
the
do it.
computer, and it comes up on my screen, and you can see it.
Yeah.
And then it never populates, and then it disappears until I disconnect it and plug it back in, and then it sees it.
Yeah, and it does the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would recommend not doing that personally, because you really shouldn't be transferring from the camera onto the computer. You should always go through a card reader in general. Same idea with transferring, like copying the photos over. If for some reason something happens, I had this horror story I just told here. A customer of mine, some power outage went through their house because they had their camera connected to their laptop. Their laptop shorted out the camera as well too. All like 10,000 photos from their vacation were gone completely.
Yeah.
And then their $3,000 camera is broken.
What?
Yeah. So I tell people never plug your camera into the computer to take images off, because you can't really trust that connection. You should always be going through a card reader.
Yeah. I have a backup. I've got a battery backup.
For sure.
So it wouldn't happen to me, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So take the card out, stick it into a reader, and like I said, that didn't work either. Like nothing was working, and then all of a sudden,
It could be the computer to itself.
it worked.
I don't know how old your computer is.
It's not old. It's 3 years old.
Okay. Then it shouldn't be that. No. Then it's. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Again, I'd have to see it in action to really understand it.
Okay. Well, I'll shoot. Sorry.
No, you're okay.
This is one of my questions. One of the reasons why I came.
Yeah. If it's a laptop, by all means, bring it in, because then we can really figure it out. If it's a desktop, then maybe take a video
It's a
as it's
desktop.
going to see. Yeah, because I'm not sure.
Desktop.
Is it a Mac?
It is a Mac. Yes, it is a Mac.
Did you go through Finder to see if it would come up? Because sometimes if it doesn't populate on the desktop, you need to go through the Finder app. So in the corner, there's a little smiley face guy. You click on that, and then from there, it'll populate everything that's externally plugged into the computer, and then show you from there. And then you should be able to click and go through, and then also see like a diagnostic report on why you're not able to.
I don't know about you, but I use the photos, the Photos app, whatever that comes with Mac.
Okay.
That's how I. That's how I get everything on and off, and it's organized through that as well. And
If you're going to try that again with plugging the cable in, try Finder, and that should honestly do it for you. You should be able to find it right away. For some reason, it's not auto-populating on the desktop. So the computer can see it, but you can't see it on your desktop. So if you go to that Finder app, it should populate automatically. Click on the camera, and then it should pull up the camera's like full screen with like what your SD card is on the inside and any other camera information.
So, but if it's in the Finder, it's not going to show you all of the.
It will. You just have to click on it.
Oh,
and then
click
it will.
on it,
Yeah,
and
you just
then
have to.
it'll open up a new window with the contents of the card.
It'll basically open up another window and then show you what card is there, and then from there you can click on the card, and then it should show you. It's usually under DCIM. I forgot what that stands for, but when you click on the DCIM, then it populates basically all the photos that you took and whatever you like to see it in gallery, list view, stuff, such and such.
Okay.
So the cloud-based solution was where I was at now. So just talking about that, Google Photos is one of them with the My Drive. OneDrive is done through Microsoft. Adobe Creative Cloud would probably be my favorite out of the bunch, only because then you have access to Lightroom, InDesign, Photoshop, all of the different apps that you can then edit and play with your photos. On top of that, too, Adobe Creative Cloud offers a cloud-based solution. And on top of that, too, they also have it where you can do like active gallery modes. And so when your photos are in the clouds, other artists and creators can see what you're doing, and they can either comment, like it, or maybe offer suggestions, whatever it is. And you could do the same thing too. So if there's something that you're trying to find or trying to accomplish using Adobe software, you can look it up, and I think that's a really great tool to have, especially if you're like getting started and you want to learn a little more post as well. So a light tour of your camera to get into it. So this is a tour of a DSLR. A lot of things have changed from that. Most of you might know DSLRs are being discontinued within the next 2 or 3 years. Originally, Nikon said that we were about 5 or 6 years away from it, but recent reports, and Nikon and Sony, or Sony only makes mirrorless, but Canon also is starting to slowly get ready to discontinue that. You'll still see lenses and such manufactured, and for the most part, Canon, Nikon, they've made adapters and ways for you to bring your other lenses into the newer systems. For Canon, for example, they have the RF series. They make an adapter that helps you bring your EF, EFS, or EFM lenses into the RF system. For Nikon, they use the Z series for their mirrorless, and they have a mount, the F to Z adapter, that allows you to bring your FX or DX lenses into the new Z format. So when we talked about in the very, very beginning, one of the things I said was with photography in general, the more money that you put into your camera, into your equipment, the better the photos turn out in the long run of things. There's only a certain point everybody kind of hits where your photos aren't really evolving anymore, and there's less and less that you can do with the camera to manipulate your photos and make them pop. Sometimes it comes down to the glass that you have on your lens. Sometimes it comes down to the body of camera that you have, depending on the sensor size and whatnot. All of that can factor into your image quality. So I guess going from there to the more money you invest in your lenses, let's say, the better off you are to then bring those over into the next series. So for example, with the Canon, if you invested in a lot of lenses for their EF series, either for their Rebel or their Mark D series, or for, there's one that's slipping my mind in Canon, but if you invested a lot of money into those, you could bring those over and use those on your R series camera. But getting into it, so the first thing, let's talk about the power switch. So on top of your camera, usually next to the shutter speed, or usually next to the shutter release button, there is a power switch. Since then, it's kind of changed. Sometimes you'll see the power switch on the opposite side of the camera, and then you will see just the shutter release button on the other side. So usually it's like a toggle between the two. But for this DSLR, and this is a Nikon specifically, the power switch is surrounding the shutter button. The shutter button, shutter release, is directly in the center there. Depending on what you're doing, if you're using autofocus or a direct manual focus, if you half click the shutter button, it will focus on the subject matter that you have. If you're using manual focus, really the shutter release only works to close and open and close the shutters. Next to all of that, you'll see a video start and stop button. The video button is typically going to be a red dot somewhere on the camera. Some of the modern cameras don't have that anymore. There's a switch, or the dial mode you can turn to get to video, but for the majority of cameras, you will see a video start and stop button on there. Moving down from there, we have exposure compensation. If you are looking at your camera, whether it's the viewfinder or the LCD screen, if you press this button while using the LCD screen or the viewfinder, you're going to see this bar pop up at the bottom of your screen that will show you exposure compensation. From there, it kind of helps you set, if you're in manual or if you're in an aperture or shutter priority, it helps you play with the amount of light that you have available and then compensate for that. So the more that you're then changing your dials, the closer you can get to centering that exposure compensation. And all that a center exposure compensation is saying is that the camera is reading the room and evaluating all its light. This is what it recommends that you be at. So if you're a little bit further off, do your best to get there. If you're a little bit further in one direction, same idea. Some people will decide as an artistic choice to keep their exposure compensation a little bit before or after that center mark, or they'll jack it up and have it way in front, or jack it real low and have it super behind that mark. It's all up to you and your preference, but that's what that button means, and that's how you can read it. You'll see another button on the camera that's usually an LV. That's the live view switch. A lot of older photographers, they're trained to really only use the viewfinder. The viewfinder is that little glass on the top of your camera. If you have one of those, it's either in the left-hand side of your camera or it's directly in the center of the camera. And what the viewfinder does is it allows you basically to look through the camera's viewfinder. In this case, in a DSLR, it would have bounce off the glass and then bounce off the mirror and then bounce through the lens. And so everything that your camera is able to see, you see it through the viewfinder. Now, some people don't like to shoot with the viewfinder. They want to see their subject both in front of them and they want to see it on the camera. They want to toggle between the two views. So you can switch the live view to then look through the LCD screen. So that's what the live view switch does. It toggles you between the viewfinder and the LCD screen. Most cameras, though, when you look at the viewfinder, will have a sensor on there that the second you put your eye up to it, it automatically detects that and will cut the LCD screen and only allow the viewfinder to look. Some people get really confused with that because that happens and they don't understand why it does. If you have big hands and you put your hand on the camera and you block out that sensor, you will notice that 9 times out of 10 and you'll think that the camera's defective when it's just all about hand placement. I had a customer that happened to and it was kind of funny. Or I had to basically tell him he was fat thumbing the camera and you just have to scoot it over to the right and you're fine. But that's what that live view button means. From there we have the command dial. For every camera it differs a little bit, but the command dial is simple depending on the priority mode that you're in. That's where then you can switch between the different, you can change a certain priority on there. So for example, actually let me go back one, we should talk about the mode dial. The mode dial switches between your multiple modes. So the one that we're mainly focusing on today is automatic, being that this is Camera Basics. Automatic is where you should be starting as a photographer to learn how to use the camera because you're allowing the camera to do all the work for you, and there's a really awesome button that I'll show you on the other side of the camera that allows you to see exactly what the camera is setting itself to when you're using automatic. And it'll even show you when you use manual or anything else what you're doing too. But through there, and we'll talk in a little bit about what all the dial things mean, usually you have automatic, you have an S that stands for shutter priority, you have an A that stands for aperture priority, you have a manual, that's the M, that means you have full control over the camera. P is program, that means you can set certain things to be automatic and other things not, and any settings that you do save on program will stay on program for the entire time. Some cameras will have scenes, which are just a fancier version of automatic. They're more focused on certain aspects. So an example is like with scenes, you might see that a camera has, with a scene mode, they will have this like flower on as a dial, and that usually means it's for macro. They'll have a running figure in scenes. That means it's for sports photography or action photography. They'll have a mountain image, and that mountain will be more representative for landscapes. There's a few other, they'll have a little face turned sideways. That's for portrait. Scene is supposed to basically be an automatic setting that you don't have to change anything to. You just tell the camera what type of photography you're doing, whether that's landscape, macro, portrait, or action and sports, and then the camera will do the rest for you. It's another cheat code for like automatic, but it's a little bit more geared towards what you're doing. Some people love that, some people hate it and say it does not work at all. It's really dependent on how you shoot and what you like. So for you, you do not have that.
Yeah, I don't have that, but as far as like FV, is that f-stop?
FV is going to be your flexible priority. So if you go through, the nice thing with Canon is they dumb it all down. So
it says at the top.
Exactly. But what's even better with Canon, let me show you, is that when you're on this, right, let's say that you had a question on it. Mm-hmm. After we click, so mode, we click info. Mm-hmm. It switches.
And like sometimes you have to touch the screen, sometimes you like the dials work, but I haven't quite figured out. I don't know it intuitively yet.
Yeah. I thought Canon did it where you could do the info button on there, but they do not. So with this one, basically, with flexible priority,
So this is another version of their auto intelligence. So it's another version of automatic. This is basically scenes, but it has a different name.
Wait, what?
This is basically flexible priority. So this is the same as, if I'm not mistaken, as scenes. It just has a different name for gaming.
Okay.
We can look at it in a little bit, and we can
Yeah.
Google after class to figure it all out.
Program TV. P for program TV.
So again, if we click on it, it'll then
that's
tell
right,
us the
So
shutter.
that's the shutter.
Mhm.
And then this is programming, right? AV is aperture, manual, okay. And then this is things you can set up.
Yep, more programables. So program 1, program 2, and program 3 on top of having your standard program. So really the R series is allowing you to, if there's certain ways that you're shooting and you really like shooting that way, so let's say you enjoy controlling the ISO and the aperture, but you don't care about shutter at all, you can do that within the program and then allow for the camera to do the rest of the work. Let's say
Right.
there's also maybe exposure compensation that you want specifically on one of the programs where you want the camera to shoot light a little less than it normally does.
Yeah.
You can then set it so it
You
does
set
that.
it, and you use P to set it, and then you call it C1 or C2
Yep.
or C3 or something.
Well, I think with that one, the program's one of them, and then you have C1, C2, and C3. So you have basically 4 different programmable settings. The flexible priority should be where, if I'm not mistaken, you can do full automatic with that guy, and then from there you're able to change certain things. So you can shoot full automatic, and then let's say you want to take something off and make it more flexible, you can do that. So if you want to control ISO while you're doing the automatic, you can then switch it so now ISO is off automatic, and now you can just do it on the FV, or you can do it where now ISO's back on automatic, now you want to switch to controlling shutter, but you want to still have everything controlled auto.
Okay,
That's where the flexibility comes in.
okay, got it.
Oh, so back to the command dial. So mode dial, that's where you can set how the camera is actually functioning and what it's doing exactly. The command dial allows you then to change what you're controlling. So if you're doing shutter speed, for example, when you turn the command dial, it will then change the rate of the shutter. If you are on aperture and you use the command dial, it'll change the rate of the aperture. And if you're on something like full manual, or you're on something like a flexible priority, usually when you turn that command dial, the first thing it'll do is change ISO, and then it'll tell you on the screen that there are other buttons to hold down in order for you to change specific things. Now if you have a touchscreen LCD, you should be able to click it and then change with the command dial as well too. From there we have our flash button. So flash button should be on the side of the camera. For the flash button, if you click that, it should automatically pop up the flash and then allow you to use. Most mirrorless cameras will not have a flash option. There's really no point with having a flash on standard mirrorless cameras. ISO on a lot of these guys ranges anywhere between 32,000 ISO at some of the lowest that I've seen, all the way up to 500,000 on some of these Sony cameras. So really the times that you would need a flash obviously would be for intense dark photos. For a lot of parents and people that are shopping here at the store, I tell them if you're doing like prom shoots or homecoming shoots where you'll be in a darker gym where there's not a lot of lights, or lights are bouncing and acting up in different colorways, it might be appropriate time to use a flash. But if you're shooting things like homecoming photos and people are standing outside and then going indoors, or maybe standing in front of a limo of some sort, you probably don't need a flash on something like that. But super low light and dark photography is where I really would recommend a flash.
So you change the ISO and it just makes it grainier.
Exactly, it will make it grainier, but the camera's megapixel sensor and everything, especially with an R, because that should be a 30 megapixel sensor if I'm not mistaken, they should be able to compensate for that, and then so the little higher that you're turning your ISO to compensate for the light inside the room, it should be able to kind of counteract the graininess.
Okay.
After that, we have our function button. Now the function button can do a couple different things on the camera. A lot of the times you can set the function button to do exactly what you want it to do. I know on my camera it actually toggles between all of the different, if I hold it down, it toggles between all of the different controls I can set function to do. Other times it'll automatically send you to whatever function is programmed to do. So for the camera itself, it's important you read the manual or double check with how it works for the specific brand that you're doing. Some brands will make you go through menu and then you can change what the function button is doing. Other brands will allow, if you hold down the function button, it'll then give you an option of which then you can change and set the function button.
So the function is basically automatic program, aperture.
It's whatever you want it to be when you click the function button.
Okay, and if you don't have one?
Then you don't need to worry about it. Some of these cameras have it, some don't. You have a mirrorless, it's a pretty simple camera, so they don't really give you a lot of options
Yeah.
on there, especially the EOS R. They keep it very simple with the buttons that they have on there.
Okay.
Most of the stuff that you're changing on the inside is going to go through the menu or the different settings.
Okay.
From there we have our zoom ring. So if we're looking at the lens, you'll probably see 2 rings on the lens depending on the type. If you have a prime lens, you are only going to see 1 ring. If you have a zoom lens or a telephoto lens, you'll see 2 rings. The zoom ring will change the millimeter size of the lens. So in this case we're looking at an 18 to 55. So this person can switch from a wide angle lens to a portrait lens or rotate between the two. There is another button underneath that says lens retract button. Certain lenses will have this depending on if they have a motor or not. Basically there is a button on the side of some of these lenses that will not allow you to rotate the lens's zoom ring unless you press that button down and then rotate. A lot of the newer mirrorless cameras will not have that on there because they have a really intense motor on there. You have the red ring around yours, so I know yours is one of the higher end. That should be the STM or USM. I can say it on the box. USM. Yeah, yours is the USM.
What does that mean?
It's just one of my Canon's best glasses that they make. So you have one of the more advanced lenses on your kit. So that's one example. But because of some of these newer cameras having advanced motor systems, especially the RF series from Canon right now, there's really no reason for a lens retract button because the lens itself is so rigid that it really won't move freely. It was more popular for the DSLRs because there wasn't that much AI components on the inside or CPU components, so you really didn't have to worry about that too much. Focus ring is on the front by the zoom ring. If you are shooting manual or DFM, which is direct manual focus, this is when you'd want to use your focus ring. Basically, it'll change how your camera's focusing, if it's focusing on a single subject matter, if it's focusing behind the subject matter, or if it's focusing in front of the subject matter. You can change and differentiate that. And depending on the camera that you have too, some will have autofocus points, continuous autofocus. Some will basically only have just regular autofocus where there's no points it's locking onto. It's either just doing a grouping where it kind of goes from a big to a medium to then a tight small one. Usually tight small one for people, medium wide for more groups or portrait shots depending on what you're doing, and then the large is for more of a landscape or a bigger group photo.
If I have questions on any particular thing, I'm not really sure how many people you got on here.
You can ask right away. Go ahead and ask.
Okay.
You take priority. They have the same thing. They can chat anytime they want.
Okay, so one of the things that I've come for a lot of different reasons, but I went from DSLR to this. Sadly, I just got my DSLR stolen.
Okay.
So now this is all I've got, so I really need to understand it.
Yeah.
The focus situation, there's, all these like little boxes, and I'm not really sure how to control those. And like the way that I'm used to doing it is I find what I want, I, focus on it, then I recompose and take the picture.
Yeah.
So, but there seems to be, it just seems to be more robust in terms
Have
of.
you gone through the focusing system on there to take a look at that?
That's why I'm here. I like to have some help in figuring out, and I don't know, I can sit over there and it's better.
So here, on the camera itself, if we just click so we're here, and let's just do auto for now. So
It's on, okay.
there it is. So we're in auto. Let's go to, let's keep it on shutter priority, because if we go to auto, it won't let us. So if we click autofocus on the bottom here, so from here we can then change the autofocus area. So if that's not what you want to do, you can always do a large zone.
You can then do a vertical zone, middle zone. You are on this expand autofocus area, so there's going to be
Okay.
dots. You can do a 1-point autofocus. You can also do autofocus plus tracking for the face. There's multiple different ones that you can do to play with, and then kind of go from there. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I might recommend just the single autofocus, because then if we switch, where's my live?
Yeah, can we make it so we can see there, like what we're looking at?
And that's going to be. Oh, you got one.
Oh, LV.
There it is. It's the info button. So now if we lock, there's only going to be the 1 point, and then we can maneuver that just a click.
So that's the 1 point. So, but what are the benefits of like that multiple thing?
It locks onto more things, so it keeps everything more focused.
Right.
Um,
So if you want, for instance, a narrower depth of field, you want the back to go out of focus, and you just want to.
That's where you probably want to use something like a manual focus then if you're being more specific, or if you're doing that then you want to change the zone of which you're focusing in. So from that 1 point you might want to go to the vertical or to one of the smaller boxes, or maybe to the other one where you're doing the face and the tracking at the same time too, or you might want to just do a manual focus.
So let's just say vertical. Say I'm photographing trees, and there's a tree in the foreground that I want in focus, and the vertical is going to give me everything where I place that. Is
Yeah.
that the idea?
That's the idea.
And then, for instance, like if it's horizontal, it might be, say, the horizon line. Okay, or the single thing where you just get to choose what you like and
Exactly.
whatever. But if you want to push the depth of field, then it's really going to be more about changing, getting out of automatic, right, and playing around with.
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Automatic, the autofocus on most of these mirrorless cameras are really geared towards the fact that these things can take photo and video better than the DSLRs did, and where the DSLRs faltered was their focusing system. A lot of people complained left and right that the focusing systems on the DSLRs weren't as fast, as quick, or as responsive as these.
Okay.
So autofocus points, when we look at that, it's a better way for us to stay on, what's the term I'm looking for, to stay more locked on our subject matter, but from not just 1 point, but from multiple tiny points that are pinpointing on whatever you're pointing at.
Like a face.
A face, but for example, if I'm taking pictures of maybe a group of people, it'll focus in on all the different shoulders, and it'll hit points on everybody's shoulders and their faces and their bodies, and it'll lock them into place.
How do you tell that? I mean, like, that's just crazy technology, right?
And you just have to look at the screen and keep going. And that's where that half shutter button keeping
Yeah,
clicking
yeah,
and going
yeah.
through. Yeah.
So, okay, and then I have not figured out how to, like, quickly move from thing to thing. I feel like you can do it inside the camera, but I haven't figured out how to control that.
That just comes with more time and going
Yeah.
through it, because everybody does it a little bit differently. Like I use Fujifilm, and mine is similar, but Fuji, in my opinion, is a cross between Canon and Sony. The menu system is very easy to read, like Canon is, but then it functions very much like a Sony. And so everybody does it just a smidge
Yeah, my
different.
son bought a Fujifilm.
I like the cameras.
He really likes
I
it.
really like the brand. I think if you get into Fuji, you really love Fuji afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, so can I ask
Sure.
really quick? So if I want an autofocus and I want to change it, you were just in that.
Mhm.
I'm trying to remember. Where's LV? We found it, right?
I just
and then
clicked
there's this, and I don't even know what the hell that is. That's like,
it's another toggle.
yeah,
So
and it's just touch sensitive, right? It just,
all I did was click the info button to toggle between them. So you don't have a live view button, you have the info button instead that then toggles you through. So
Okay.
regular photo through LCD, now you get all the information on the side so you can do the quick changes. Now you have a histogram, so now you can see the light balances and contrast, and then you can do nothing on there, so you just have the unadulterated image, and then now you're in viewfinder only.
so if I wanted to go back to
Info?
the autofocus,
So
you had it.
all I did for this was then basically click the Q set button, and then from there I can change my autofocus. And then on the bottom here, it gives me all my options.
Oh,
If
gotcha.
I'm not in that screen, let's say, okay, I'm going to set it to the spatial area. Now I just go to the histogram, same thing, I would just click the Q set. Now let's say I was on here, Q, now this makes my touch screen available. Now I can then go through and select whatever I want.
So Q is what? It takes you back to what?
Q.
That's what
Q is your set button. So if we look in the bottom here, it shows Q on there. We have to click that button before this becomes available. That's all that Q is. It's the button that you're using to then get ready to set everything. From there, then you can select what you want, and then once you got it.
So
then
it
you can-
makes it a touchscreen? Is that?
Yeah, it allows you to change
Yeah,
everything.
major, okay.
Yeah, it unlocks the camera.
It unlocks it, okay.
Because
got
at the current moment, if you have it there, there's nothing you can do.
Oh.
Even if you're here,
it. Right,
the only thing you can do is focus. If you want to change anything, you got to click that button in order to change it.
thank you. Okay, that's cool.
All right. No, you're fine. You're fine.
This is why I came.
So we have the lens retract button. Now we have the lens release button. On the back or on the front of your camera body, you should have a button that you can push in and then rotate your lens counterclockwise. That'll allow for you to take it off. Most lenses, all lenses, should have a little dots to dot symbol that where when the two lenses line up, you'll hear it like a click, but then you'll also be able to match the dots up in order to rotate it properly to get that click. That's just to make sure that you don't ruin the threading on your lenses, because that's typically the one thing that can happen over extended usage on some cameras is the mounting system where the lens and the body meet can get worn out or beat up. Then from there on the bottom we have our drive mode. Drive mode changes things from continuously shooting to a single shot image to burst shot images. Everybody does it a smidge different on their cameras, but if you see a button that has basically a bunch of squares stacked up on each other and then a timer, that is going to be the drive mode. The timer stands for like a time-elapsed photo, so if you set the camera up and let's say you want a 10-second timer, you can click it, run, take a photo of yourself, and then run back behind the camera. A lot of people will just use a phone app nowadays for it, so you won't see that on most mirrorless cameras. Most of these have a companion app that you can download on your phone. You're able to use it as a remote. You're able to transfer photos to your phone. There's a bunch of different stuff that you can do depending on what you're looking for. So the back of your camera, menu button is on the top. Menu should take you through all the different settings on there. Sometimes when you're operating certain parts of the camera, menu could be another button that you're clicking in order to change the shutter or the aperture, depending on the mode that you're shooting in from your mode dial. But for the majority of people, when you click menu, it should take you into your camera's full menu system where you can then make changes on the specs, the ratios, and other controls on the camera. On the viewfinder, next to the viewfinder, we have the diameter adjustment. Just like a pair of binoculars, if you put your eyes up to the diameter or to the viewfinder, you're going to notice that it might look a little bit blurry. So you're going to want to rotate the diameter until it's adjusted perfectly for your eye. Info button. So earlier when I was talking about shooting on automatic, I said that if you click on that there's a button in the back that'll show you exactly what you're doing on full auto. That's the info button. If you then go to where it says image playback button, so a little bit lower than that square with a triangle in it, and you click play, it'll show you all the pictures that you've taken that are saved currently to the SD card. When you're on there, you can then find an image you really, really love, click the info button, and it'll break down all the stats for you that the camera did. So this is what I recommend to a lot of beginning photographers or people who are just getting used to their camera and want to figure out where the perfect spot for light, balance, aperture, shutter, everything kind of lies. The info button tells you all of that based on the photo that you've already taken. So let's say you were shooting in auto all day, you found a really beautiful photo that you loved on your SD card, you're going, oh wow, I like this one a lot. You click the info button, it should break down for you what ISO the camera chose was best, what aperture the camera chose was best, what the speed of the shutter that was best, and there's one more thing.
F-stop?
And the f-stop. No, aperture and f-stop are the same thing.
Aperture, speed, ISO.
Yeah, those would be the three things. Might tell you what type of autofocus you were using, or what type of focus you were using, but those are the three things it should break down, which that's the exposure triangle. Those are the things that you're trying to learn how to use properly in manual focus, that you have full control over, that dictate whether your photo comes out stark black or super white or perfectly balanced. From there we have our focus and exposure lock. So when we're using that button, it should then show us on the menu or on the screen what we're toggling between as far as the focus is concerned. So usually on the screen we'll see a bunch of different lines or objects on there. As we toggle between that button, we should slowly start to see that stuff disappear or reappear onto the camera. Info button, that is another one. If you click the I button, usually it has a bunch of different things that it does. The camera typically will tell you what the I button gets used for. There's a lot of different functionalities for it. It's all dependent on what you're doing on the camera in that exact moment. Sometimes the I button is the info button that tells you about what a certain setting change will do. Sometimes the I button is one that you hold down and you then change with the command dial, and you're able to change your aperture or your shutter priority if you're in a full manual. The I button can kind of be anything it needs to be when it needs to be something on the camera, if that makes sense. Multi-selector, those are the arrow keys or the rotational dial pad that's around the OK button, or in this case a Q/set button. Again, that's a way for you to select certain things depending on what you're doing. A lot of these newer cameras have touchscreens, so you can just touch and go, but some of these cameras have to use the multi-selector depending on the age. The OK button, that's the set or OK button. Click on that. That should either bring you into something or allow you to select something, or to hit OK so you can move back to an old menu. It's kind of like your enter button on the computer. It does a whole bunch of different stuff, but its main priority is to say OK and then move to the next. Magnifier button and then a demagnifier button. I use this when I'm looking at the graininess of my photos, or when I'm looking in to see if there was something that was moving when I was taking a photo to catch blur and motion. Some people will use this to see how far into a photo they can get depending on their megapixel size. There's a lot of other reasons why you might use a demagnifier button, but that's typically the reason I use it. Only because for myself, I shoot photos with a high grain count on there. I actually jack my grain up because I want my photos to have more of a vintage look on my one camera. That's more of my personal camera. So I shoot with grain high. So with that, because grain can become kind of overbearing on a photo, I'll use the magnifier button to see how detailed or how sharp I got the image to be with the graininess included on there.
Is that this?
No, that is going to be your menu. So see how that's there and see how that's gone?
Okay.
That just takes everything off the screen for you. There is that button right there, but it doesn't have any symbol in there. If we go playback and we look at an image, that will magnify as you're going.
So, okay, totally missed that. Okay,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
So you're here,
Yeah,
you hit the playback button,
right.
now you click this, it
Uh-huh.
will magnify on there. Now use your fingers to pinch,
Oh.
and then now
right.
you can zoom in even more. So
Okay.
by clicking this button, it'll open up the magnifier for you, and then using your fingers on the screen, you can demagnify or remagnify.
Okay, see, in this, again, my other camera didn't, it
Yeah.
had a magnifying glass, I click, and I went in and out, and
It's those little
I'm
changes.
not used to having the touchscreen at all.
For sure. But that's a good point to bring up. So in her camera right now, she has the EOS R from Canon. The button for the magnifier is just a symbol of a magnifying glass, and once you click that when you're on the image playback button, it then lets you use your fingers on the LCD screen to zoom in and zoom out. So again, everybody's camera is a little bit different when it comes to what's there, but these are the basic buttons that have kind of been around on cameras, at least since the DSLR time. It might be time for us to update this, but I feel like this camera as a whole, this Nikon camera, shows you every single button that could be on your camera, if that makes sense. The delete button is all below that. It should be a garbage can symbol, and that should be pretty self-explanatory. Sometimes on the camera itself, the delete button becomes the back button, but it'll tell you that on the camera as you're using it. Other times there won't be a delete button because you have a full LCD touchscreen, and so the delete button will pop up when it presents itself or when it needs to be there. Now going back into the mode dials a little bit, I can kind of explain this a little bit more. With this, every camera is a little different. So if we're looking at this right now, we can see on the left side, that's a Canon one. Those are the different settings that Canon allows for you to have on your mode dial. On the right, we've got a Nikon, and then on the very bottom, we have a Sony. Yeah, it's a Sony camera. But basically, if you look at the dials and all the different things on there, they're all, for the most part, the same. Where we see some differences is when we look at the Nikon one. Now we have these scene modes on there, and that's what on the right side of that is. So I'm using all of these guys, except for the manual at the top there. That's not supposed to be there. But that nighttime photography, that macro, that sport, kids, landscape, portrait, those are different scene modes where you're still shooting in automatic, but the camera is now gearing itself to be more towards that environment that you're shooting in. Nighttime photography, pretty self-explanatory. You have darkness around you and you want to get the best picture you can, and you want the camera to either flash or use the best amount of ISO or light that it can. Macro, you want a super close-up and intensified image. The camera will do its best to take a macro photo even if you don't have a macro lens. Sports, same idea there too. You're doing motion, it's going to be focused on that. Kids, this one always confused me a little bit. I talked to somebody about it before, and they told me with kids there's a couple different things that can happen. Movement can be intense with children, so if kids are running around moving, it kind of does what sport does, but on a little bit less of a basis. Kids is supposed to also be better when you're shooting on the same level as them, which we'll talk about a little later in the video. And then but for the most part, you really won't see those dials anymore, only because for the majority of them, you'll see on the newer cameras that we now have A+, which is Scene Intelligent Auto. The camera itself is becoming smarter and smarter to the point now where the auto on the camera will do everything that Scene did for you, plus some. And it also makes it less complicated for you, the shooter, so that way you don't have to sit there and go, oh, well, I'm still getting used to this. Maybe I should switch to nighttime. No, you should probably just keep it at auto and then take photos as you would from there, then learning what to actually do on the camera to make better nighttime photos. And then going back into it again, so A, auto control over settings and functions of cameras. M, full manual control over the camera's array of functions. A or AV, aperture priority control. S or TV, shutter speed priority control. P is program, aperture and shutter are auto, but everything else is changeable. And then B, camera is fully customizable, but as long as you're holding the shutter release, the camera will stay open. This changes for some people, but from when I was learning how to use a camera in general, it's bulb. And what you would use bulb for way back in the day with DSLRs or even SLRs was you would set the camera to the bulb setting, which would basically keep the shutter open for as long as it possibly could, and that would allow for long exposures. So if you're someone who's trying to do really cool long exposures, which I have some examples of later on, B would be a great option to use. But again, and the most important thing, start with auto. If you're brand new, just got this camera, use your automatic focus or use your automatic setting on there, and then after you take your photos, click your info button. Learn about what the camera set your photo to take that image, especially if it's an image that you really like and think looks amazing. You definitely could find out what the camera set that to, so that way you know. And I think too, the biggest thing that's daunting for people is they think there's a set formula for the exposure triangle, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks class from now. But the exposure triangle is really your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO all coming together to form a triangle, and in the center of the triangle is going to be that perfect picture. So how you're balancing everything on that triangle is basically what auto is automatically doing for you. And that's a great way to look at it, and as you're getting more experience, you can then play with that. Again, using scenes, they are automatic modes. They are just spelled out to be specific towards what you're doing. If you don't see that on your camera, don't fear. You have it. It's in the auto. It's automatically in automatic.
Do you know if on the Canons, if is it like in on the screens, like it's not on the dial. Like I'm used to it.
Yeah,
On my
you
Nikon.
you shouldn't have it on there anymore. It should all be in basically that A+. So as soon as you set it to A+, it's going to do all of those
So it's
things
gonna
now.
just know what you're
Exactly.
pointing at and deal
Exactly.
with it. Like,
Exactly.
okay.
Because people were complaining because if you tried the speed on that one, it usually did not do what you wanted. And if you tried using the nighttime photography, it also would like throw the flash out when it didn't need to.
Yeah.
The overall they
I was
were
constantly overriding the flash. I hated the flash.
yeah.
I like so. Yeah, I'd hold the thing down so that it wouldn't flash.
Literally.
Yeah.
And it's nice because that's something you don't have to worry about now with having the mirrorless and having that from Canon. And at the same time, these features were great, but more and more customers that I have talked to that have been shooting with cameras for so many years said that was a bunch of garbage and that those never truly work the way that you wanted
Right.
them to. But the intelligent auto, that A+ is supposed to give you all of those into the one.
It's intelligent auto.
Exactly.
Do you know what? I don't know what just happened here. So do you know what this is all about? It's like a timer thing.
Yeah, you're on bulb.
Oh well,
So-
okay. I wasn't on bulb. Hold on. Okay, wait. Let me go back to something else.
Because it's showing a timer on there, and it looks like you have a version of the continuous going.
So this is my problem. Is accidentally okay. See, it's still doing this. This is on
so you-
automatic. It's a timer.
Yeah, you set a timer on there. So if we go into your settings and we click this guy, you have it on the drive mode. So that's that one button I was telling you that can live on the front of your camera. Well, instead for yours, it lives in here. So
Okay.
you just want to go to single shooting or high speed continuous, low speed continuous, 10-second timer, 2-second timer. You just want single shot.
God, here I was, in here, and I couldn't figure out how do you get down to the bottom, because every time I use, I'm used to using dials. I'm not used to touching. But if I'm looking in here, I need to use a dial. I can't touch.
Yeah.
Or is it forcing you to use this?
I mean,
screen?
they're supposed to really be used in like together. But if you're using it with this, yeah, you're gonna see it all on the bottom of your screen, and then that's where then you can use the Q button. So look, I just clicked the Q button.
Okay.
Now put it up to your eye.
Okay. So, okay, gotcha. So
And now you can
I
set-
can use the setting. Wait, that way. And I had it on timer probably.
You had it on timer, so you want to go single shot,
Single
or you
shooting.
want to do multiple shots if that's what you're trying to accomplish.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so what's multiple shots? High speed.
Yeah, so it'll go
High
real
speed, low
fast
speed.
and then low speed. So the high speed one I probably would use if I'm doing sport photography. But let's say
Yeah.
I'm shooting a wedding and I just want to make sure I don't miss a really candid photo. I might use slow so that way I can get multiple frames of a slower moving object.
Right.
This is one of my favorite pictures I like posting with this, is that my camera doesn't work. This is a lot of photos that I get from customers that I sell them a brand new spanking camera, and they come to me and they're like, I don't understand, this $2,000 camera doesn't work. It does work. It is not a camera error, it's a user error.
Yeah, of course.
This is a prime example of what we're about to now talk about, which is framing up your images and finding ways to take better photos without having to take any type of art theory classes or getting into like a whole discussion of how art is supposed to look or how framing things are supposed to look. These are simple tools and tricks that I use when I'm shooting, or I'm a painter and a drawer, so these are simple things that I use when I'm painting and drawing scenes, and I want to make sure that I'm capturing the right emotion or purpose for my work. Before I do that though, it's important to remember your camera isn't a smartphone. I get a lot of customers who come in who say they just want to buy a camera that takes a better picture than the phone. And that's really tough to do nowadays. You have cameras that are extremely powerful. The new iPhone 14, for example, has a 48 megapixel sensor on its main camera. That means it's double the sensor as a Sony or a Nikon or a Canon. But at the same time, its sensor size is so much smaller than a Nikon, a Canon, or a Sony that if you tried to print this picture out or blow it up or do anything with it that revolved editing or post-production, it's not going to be the best quality. Your smartphone is meant for social media, is meant for Facebook, is meant for those quick images that you can take pictures of, snapshots if you will. Your camera functions as just a camera. Its sole purpose is to take a clean and amazing photo using all of its advanced systems in there. So it's important to treat the camera as such. And remember that what your phone is doing is not exactly the same thing that your camera is doing. Your camera will do better than your phone, but you need to understand your camera in order to get that. So if you're having issues where you don't understand why your phone is taking better photos than your camera, it's probably time to maybe take another class or to get a private lesson of some sort, because there's ways to get around it depending on the camera that you own. Most cameras nowadays that beat out an iPhone are priced anywhere between about $900 to $800 at the very low end, and then jump up into the thousands as the high end. But you really will not find an entry-level camera out in the public now that is less than $700 or $800 that can perform at or better than an iPhone or a Samsung or a Google even. Now the Pixel Pro the 7 is coming out, and that's a really wonderful cell phone camera too. So first thing, and I feel like it's a simple one, but holding your camera, it's really important. As an artist, there are a couple things you need to be fearful of. It is going to be back and neck problems and arthritis. You're holding cameras and you're holding pencils or pens or anything in your hands, you're holding it in an awkward position that's going to cause your hands over time to develop arthritis or other pains. It's really not preventable. If this is something that you're into and you do a lot, you will start to notice that your hands and fingers will hurt after some periods of time. But there's ways to prevent that. One of the things that you can do is making sure that you're holding your camera properly. First things first is your back. Never ever shoot with an arched back, either forward or backward. Don't even try to do that if you're trying to take pictures and set stuff up. I know that for some it's a force of habit and there's no way around it, but if you can position yourself where your back isn't in an awkward position, taking a picture where you're bending over or maybe getting a little bit lower on the plane of what subject matter you're taking, find a way to get yourself with a straight back on that plane. You'll thank yourself over time, and you'll prevent any injuries or soreness. 2, holding your camera, it's important that we put weight underneath the camera. The guy on the top there, when we're looking at him with the Gap shirt on, he's holding it with these kind of claw hands. Number one, it looks awkward, but number 2, it definitely doesn't feel good on the shoulders or on the chest or on the forearms. Now when we look at the bottom one, or we look at the person to our right with the green check mark, my little face is covering her out a little bit there, but we can see that she has her arms positioned in front of her and the camera in front of her face. We want to do that because by putting the camera like this in front of us, we can use our elbows to lock into our stomachs or into our chests, and we automatically have, number 1, more stability, but number 2, we have better kind of leverage on the forearms, so we're not getting as sore and we're not stretching or kind of hurting anything. But then we also have a better just grip as a whole. So if something were to knock into us or bump us or prevent us from taking the photo because we fall over, we have the ability to continue shooting through that based on where our arms are. So important to remember, you focus, then you shoot, and when you shoot through the picture. When I say that, focusing is what you're going to do first. If you're using manual focus or if you're using autofocus, you want to make sure that whatever you're taking a picture of is in the most crisp image or crisp view as possible. Autofocus makes it pretty easy. You do a half click. Manual focus gets tricky. That's where you're adjusting that focus ring we were talking about earlier, and you're trying to make sure that you're getting your subject squared up and in the best focus as possible. I keep using the word focus, trying to find another word. Shoot through the picture. And when I say that, I think of it like if you're playing sports, if you throw a football or you take a basketball shot, you follow through. So when you throw the football, your arm extends through and you push past your body. When you shoot, it goes up and then you arc your hand and you kind of do the whole motion with that, but you follow through with it. When you're taking a photo, you should follow through with it too. Press that button all the way down, look at the image after you've taken it. You're shooting through the person, through the image, through whatever it is, to capture not just them, but everything around them. So it's not just one thing that you're taking a picture of when you're taking a photo. You're taking a picture of everything that's inside that frame, and that's all stuff that you're shooting through, or when you shoot, you're shooting through it to get everything into that picture. If you or the camera are moving, you will get blurry photos. There are ways around it with built-in stabilization and all this certain, all of that nature. And there are really great photographers that make a living off of taking blurry photos because that's what they're well known for. That's what they enjoy playing with. But at the end of the day, if you're a hobbyist or you're trying to take the best vacation photos ever, like of the Eiffel Tower, you want to make sure that you're focused and that you're not moving. So it's important that when we're holding the camera, that's where we're remembering keeping our arms in front of us and shooting and having one hand under and one hand on the side. That's where a neck strap comes in. Having something where we can have then the camera on our neck, we can focus on that strap and pull, giving the strap to be really taut around our necks, but that'll also give us better stabilization when we're shooting. Tripods, monopods, that sort of thing, also great. Might be a little bit bulky to pack on your Paris trip, but also could prevent you from taking a lot of blurry photos. Now, basics for taking great photos. Fill the frame is one of my first recommendations. When we look at the picture on the left, we see a lot of negative space around our subject matter, things that don't need to be there, awkward shadows on the wall based on the molding. And then we also have where the floor and the wall meet. We can see that too. There's really nothing benefiting having all this negative space in the frame. So it doesn't happen all the time, but in this case, if we fill the frame with the subject matter, we automatically get a more interesting picture. The picture on the right feels more like a headshot, something you would put on your resume or send maybe to a casting director if you were in a play, or maybe you're getting ready to gear your kids up for college recruitment and you want to send a picture of what the kid looks like on top of all the sports tapes. This is probably what you'd want to do. You don't want to get the whole room unless that's pertinent to the photo. You want to fill the frame to avoid awkward negative space that doesn't do much for us. Eyes in the top third. If we divide an image into 3 sections, and we will later, we divide photos into 9 squares basically. We want to make sure that if we're taking a portrait picture, and it does apply for this one too, we want to keep the eyes in the top third of the picture frame. So in this case, his eyebrows are more likely on the top third line. But if we look at the lady from the first photo, we can see that her eyes are in the top third of that photo. It helps for our eyes as the viewer to move through the image a little bit better. If you think about it, when you're taking photos of something, we're attracted or drawn to some of the more standout and sharp things. When we look at humans, a lot of the times the one thing we're going to look at are their eyes first. We navigate to the eyes, and then we break from the eyes and we examine the whole face. Now that can change if the person has tattoos that you're taking pictures of, if they're wearing a costume of some sort, if there's other things happening in the image that are distracting, our eyes will go there first. But if we can keep the eyes of the portrait or person that we're taking in the top third, we're going to get something that's a little bit more professional. Focusing in on the eyes, and also another great example because her eyes are on the top third of the photo too. Focus on the eyes. There's that whole joke of the eyes are the gateway to the soul. The eyes show more about the person that we're taking photos of if it is portrait work than anything else. Children are very expressive in their eyes. People that are doing activities or, I look at the marathon runners or the track runners. You can see all the emotion in their face while they're running, and it all starts in the eyes. So if we focus in on that, we can easily get a much sharper picture. And when you're shooting on something like a Canon or a Nikon, they have really great eye autofocusing technology where basically it finds the eyes on the person, reduces red eye, and tracks from the eye, because if you can focus in on the eye, they can keep the rest of the face in focus too. Because when you really think about it, the eye is changing constantly depending on if we squint or open them up. Our face is usually staying in some way, shape, or form the same no matter how we're expressing muscles or moving stuff. Now get on their level, that's the next thing I put on this one. I use this photo because I think this is a funny photo as far as a birthday party goes. I think it is what we're most typically going to see as people who just take quick pictures for like a birthday or a party. But if you can drop down and actually get on the kid's level as the thing is happening, you can actually get something a little bit sharper. Now, given with this photo, there's a lot more intentional light, there's a lot more directness, and we're seeing a lot more clarity in this as opposed to the other image. What we're getting with this one is we're on the same level as this kid's eyes, and it just leads to a more pleasant and more put together photo. I'm sure that if we would have dipped down and got this kid in his star sunglasses right in the front, or his sister who's probably got him on too, it probably would have came out really nice and sharp, given that there's good light coming from all around and everything else. So it's something to look at and play with. Another thing to get lower than that as well, there's something about hierarchy scale, which I don't have a lot of examples on, but if you ever look at a superhero movie poster, we call it hierarchy poster scaling, where you have usually a character on the top that is your main person, villain, or thing of interest, and then you have all these other characters scattered through. Stranger Things poster does it, a lot of the Star Wars and Marvel posters do it, but you're building hierarchy. You're putting something on top, and then you're basically creating kind of a pyramid below for how things go. When you're doing that in the sense of taking photos, building a hierarchy scale can be as simple as placing a subject above you, so that way when you're shooting, instead of shooting directly at you, I'm shooting up towards you. It leads to then having just more power and more direction in the photo, but it also leads to a nicer looking photo. And especially with kids who are already smaller individuals, taking a photo lower than their level makes them more big and empowered, and in this case we see how beautiful the frame is filled. We're following a bunch of the other techniques, and if we look at the girl who's sitting in the center of the image, her eyes are in the top third of the photo, and I would say out of the bunch, if you were to look, your eyes are probably going to her first. Her head is above everybody else's. Her eyes are not the clearest, but you can still see them in pretty clear and detailed fashion. Now we break down the rule of thirds, and when I said earlier that we divide our photo into 9 different squares, this is what I was referring to. So if we go top to bottom, we have a top, a middle, and a bottom section, and if we're going left to right, we have a right, a center, and a left section. Those are how you're breaking your photo into thirds. That's how then you break your photo into ninths. With this, where the red circles are, if we can meet or have a line or have a part of our subject cross at those crosshairs, we're going to optimize our photo and have a better looking photo that's more pleasing towards the human eye. And that's the goal here, is that whatever photo we're taking, we want to make sure that we can show this to somebody else and have them see the beauty, the clarity, the intention of the photographer's abilities. So for instance, I have my surfer. When we look at him, we can also look at a couple different things. I'll talk about the horizon line and finding vanishing points. But when we look at the surfer, we see him standing perfectly on the right side of our rule of thirds. His shadow is dropping down too, so we're crossing both of those circled points that I showed earlier. Horizon line is all the way behind us. And so overall, we just have a beautiful photo where the horizon line is almost even with the actual image and framing of the photo. And we have a surfer who's following the rule of thirds perfectly. There's also another rule too about keeping the sun on your back. In this case, he's keeping the sun on his back and he's allowing for the light to kind of overpower him, leaving the surfer to be completely black by shadow. But we have this gorgeous sunset behind him and waves and water and other people in the distance. So overall, we have something that's just a little bit more powerful and has a little more oomph to it. Another photo we have of the girl standing on the beach. She is on the rule of thirds, but she is on the left side. And same thing too, we have a really nice horizon line in the back that's almost perfect with the body of water that's behind her too. So we're hitting multiple points on this one that make the rule of thirds pop, but then also make for a more interesting image. Another rule of thirds photo that we have here, we have 2 different couples, or I should say a family. We have a father and a mother and then a brother and a sister. We have them lined up. Now, the only thing that could make this better is if the mom moved over a little bit to the right and was standing in basically with her and her husband directly in the center of that line, just like the kids are, or vice versa. If the kids moved over a little bit, it would work. But overall, they're still following the rule, and this is an interesting photo as far as a family portrait is concerned, because it's giving the kids more of a presence, because you're on the same level as the kids, and the parents being more in the background, but also being taller, they're a little bit higher up. So we have a hierarchy scale here where we can tell those are kids, and we can tell that they're probably related in some way, shape, or form to the two in the back. I know that it's a mom and dad and a brother and a sister, but if you were just looking at this photo with no context, that's what you probably could put together based on how you're imaging and how you're laying things out in the frame. Then we got Jim. This is one of my favorite ones because I think The Office did the rule of thirds perfect. Jim is on the line for the rule of thirds, and on top of that too, his eyes are hitting the top portion, so the top third. It's a little lower than it, but it's right there. But now this is a great example of where filling the frame probably isn't the most necessary thing. If we look at where Jim is, we know that this is a scene in The Office where they usually do like a flashback to the interviews in the conference room. Having the conference room wall and the window behind him and that little bit of a plant, it builds this idea that we're in an office. So sometimes filling the frame isn't the most appropriate thing, because sometimes there's information behind the subject that we want to keep within that picture that'll help build worlds and help show us where we're at and give us more context to the image. So another thing to think about. Not everything needs to be followed with a T, but if you can remember certain parts of this as you're shooting, you're going to take a better photo. Sun on your back. So if we look at the top and then we look at the bottom one, the top one we can see that the sun is above him in some way, shape, or form. However, he's hunched over. We're not allowing for any light to really pass through. And so the fish is dark, his shirt is dark, the hat that he has on is dark and it's covering his face. Really, you can't make out that that's, let's say Bob. You can't make out that that's our friend Bob. You can see the fish and you can see the water and the sky. It looks beautiful. But now he moves the fish out of his face. He opens himself up a little bit more to the sun. And now his shirt is lit up more from the front. We can tell that right away. His face is lit up. There's light coming from the fish itself. Overall, there's just more light opening things up in the photo so we can make out the differences and see all the details. And the sun itself is positioned better behind his back as opposed to being more above him or off to the side in an awkward angle.
There's a setting change there. It's not the position really of the sun. Look, like, is it opened up in the foreground? Like, is it
So for this
longer
one,
exposure, or
for this one it was the person who took the photo took two of the same with a manual focus, and they didn't change any of the settings on there.
So, I mean, I'm not sure I understand. Like, there's light on his legs and face and skin and the fish and his, on the bottom one. How is that? It's not. He somehow, was able to get past the whole backlit problem. So,
I mean, if you look at his shoulder, he's turned more towards this way on there. It's not much of a change, but you can see that he's opened himself up a little bit more. So that sun that's not hitting him from the top photo, that's either in the same position or a little bit off to the one angle or the side. It looks like they're in this very similar position. If not, they moved over to the right a little bit. The sun is now cutting through and it's lighting up the fish, and then it's lighting up more of, I'm assuming it's reflecting off of the fish too, given that it's coming from over the back. But either way, we're still able to see more of the shirt because he's opened up more. Instead of having it directly in front of him, his head's turned more to the side, and his head is now positioned off to the side a little bit, so now we have more light coming from the side. Yeah. In this one, I would assume that it's only because he's opening himself up more that we're able to actually see the light bouncing off a little bit and then lighting himself up. Last thing I like to always mention with doing this stuff is use the timer or use your camera app on there. You found out where the timer was on there for your camera, but if you download the companion app that's made for all your cameras, you can also access a timer. You can access photo transfer apps, or from sending photos from your camera to your phone. You can also, for some of these apps, access like an editor system on there where you can play with the physical photos, change things up, and make some minor edits to it. It will eat the camera battery up a lot. It'll eat your phone battery up a lot. I definitely would not recommend doing this all the time. Otherwise, you won't have a lot of battery to take photos and shoot. But if this is something that you want to use maybe while you're taking pictures and there's a couple photos you took that are just perfect, and you want to put them on social media or send them to your friends, you can transfer them to your phone and then do all that.
And that's an app?
All the cameras come with one. They should tell you in the directions which one to download for Canon. Other recommended accessories, really the only thing you need to get started is a camera, a lens, and an SD card of some sort. Usually when you buy a camera, they give you a strap, so you don't need that. But that's the bare minimum. From there, I probably would tell you to at least get an extra battery, a bag to store all this stuff in, a memory card of some sort, and a lens cleaning kit. I had a friend of mine who had a bag, had the extra memory card, had the extra battery, didn't have any way of cleaning, and he went on a photo shoot that involved a lot of mud, and it all kicked up towards the lens, and he really did not have an effective way of getting that mud off without using a t-shirt. And by the very end of it, his shirt was all messed up, and the lens still had smudge marks on there, and there was just no spray or clean cloth or anything to use. So having some sort of kit is nice. Like I said, you'll get a strap with the camera itself when you first get one, but they make really nice padded or leather straps that you can get. Tripods are really great, monopods are really great, built-in stabilization there, so depending on how you're shooting or what you're shooting, tripod might be necessary. The external hard drive I talked about earlier pairs well with a laptop or a tablet, however you're transferring photos from the camera to where you're going. Various filters, you can get polarized filters, you can get UV filters, you can get Ultra HD UV filters, just protection filters, neutral density filters. They make colored filters, all different sorts of things that'll change how your photos are being taken and the light and the way that interacts.
Are you a fan of any particular filter that like you always kind of want to have on your?
No, I really shoot with a lot, like no filters for a lot of the times. A lot of the lenses that I use have some sort of hood, and when you have a lens hood, it doesn't really allow you to use a filter on there.
So what is it? Does the lens hood have more to do with glare, like
100%.
avoiding? Is that what it's
Yeah,
for?
typically with the lens hood, if they give you a lens hood with the lens that you have, it's meant because of however they made the lens, there's a better chance for light to kind of hit at a funny angle and for glare to be created. You see it a lot with like a fisheye lens, or not a fisheye, but you'll see it a lot with like ultra wide angle lenses. Because if you ever look at an ultra wide angle lens, it basically is like, here is where the lens ends, and then all of a sudden you just have this dome coming off the front. You can't put a filter on there. Only a lens hood would help with that. But like, for instance, sometimes when I'm shooting, I have a really nice 18 to 55 millimeter 2.8 that I shoot with a lot for my Fuji, and it's awesome, but I can't put a filter on it with the hood. Mm-hmm. So if I'm shooting in an area where I'm not hitting a lot of intense glare, a lot of the times I won't use a lens filter at all. The hood is just fine. And then if I'm in an area where I'm getting a lot of bad glare, then I might go to a neutral density, so I can rotate between UV and polarized, because sometimes I really don't need a polarized. I don't need all of that like cutting of light and glare. I just need something to help basically not allow for bad glare to like hit my lens.
Yeah, I had a filter on my last camera, and it was wherever I bought it, the guy's like, you really need just to have this. Not only will it affect, I don't know what, UV or whatever it was, but it'll protect your lens and all of the rest of it.
Overall, that is probably one of the best things about a lens filter. If you don't have a lens hood or you don't have anything else that you need to be putting on there, just get a standard UV filter that protects. You can find ones for like 11 to 20 bucks. Those are probably the best ones to throw on there. Where, yeah, if something were to come up and just hit your lens, you won't have to worry about a scratch or something bad affecting it.
Yeah, and in doing that, you're looking, like for instance, for this one, a 77 millimeter.
Yeah, so on there it should have a circle with a line going through it, and then it'll have a number next to it, and that's how you determine the diameter of your lens filter. Or cap. If you need another cap, that's how you would do it too. Additional lenses you can get to, we talk about that more in the intermediate class, which we'll be doing in 2 weeks. And then on top of that, too, more classes and workshops. If you are a person of photography or of any type of art form, you should always be a student and a learner. There's always something new that people are coming up with, and there's so many pieces of information out there that if you only find one source for the information, or you close yourself off to other sources, you might be missing out on another way of thinking about something or looking at something. And that is all I have today. Intermediate class will not be next week. I will be out of town, unfortunately, so it will be in 2 weeks from now. So on the 27th is when we are going to be doing the intermediate. Let me just triple check so I didn't lie to you guys. I did lie. 24th. No, sorry, 17th. 17th is going to be the next one. Yeah, I knew there was a 7 in there. So next week, the 10th, we are off. I will be out of town, unfortunately. Sorry, everybody. The 17th, we will be doing the intermediate class, and then we'll finish up the month on the 24th with drones and just the drones class.
And sorry, the 24th. Is that Thanksgiving?
Oh, is that really Thanksgiving?
I think
Yeah,
so.
that would be Thanksgiving. Oh, wow. All right, so we probably won't be doing a class on the 24th. So then, yeah, this week for this month, we're going to be doing the 3rd, which will be our basic camera, and then we'll be doing the 17th, which is our intermediate. We'll be taking 2 weeks off basically this month. Thank you for letting me know. I forgot.
Is it usually the first 2 Thursdays?
Yes.
Okay.
First Thursday is basics. Second Thursday is normally intermediate, and then we take a break the 3rd. The final Thursday is now drones. Drones is our
Oh, I
4th
didn't
one.
know that.
We did action cameras, and nobody really showed up for that class. We do a lot of drone sales here at APT, and a lot of people that ask questions about how to fly them, basic controls, stuff like that. So we kind of go over the whole mix of all that stuff.
Well, I've got other questions if you're done with them. I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead, ask away.
So honestly, I would love to just like turn this thing around and just go through just everything. Just like, okay, like even at the beginning, like just the difference between, okay, the menu is this and the info is that, right?
Yeah.
and basic what I'm having a hard time with is getting into somewhere and not knowing how to get back out, because I'm so used to my Nikon.
Yeah, that's just the back button. That's just that one back button to click. There's a little arrow that points back.
Yeah. Got it. But it's not all.
I would say show me an example of what you need a question on.
Sure. Here, let me just go over there because.
I'll keep this open for a little bit. Anybody who else has any questions, feel free to ask in the chat.
Okay. So, for instance, God, I don't even. Let's just start with the outside.
Well, no, I'm just putting the laptop away.
So when, let's see. So this is the problem. I'm gonna be like, how did I get where I was? Okay, we're in. Shit. See, I don't even know how I got that part. We're good with that. Nope, didn't do that.
So definitely the first thing you should be doing is reading the manual. I'll be.
You know what? The manual, honestly, this is such a drag. The manual, I cannot print it out. It doesn't print out.
You can't just read the PDF version on the computer at least to see
Yeah,
everything?
you know what? I'm an old-fashioned person.
Because I'll be honest with you, I can show you how to use most of the functionality of it, but when it comes to the very specifics that make a Canon or a Nikon,
Yeah.
that I'm not going to really know about, and that's going to be where like reading the book and kind of going through that.
Yeah.
I would say what questions do you have in order to make this thing function to take photos?
Right. Okay.
So right now you're in video.
So I know, like, that's how did I get there? Like, this is what I'm trying to get the basics. Like, okay, Amy, by the way. You know, don't, you know, for instance, you know, whatever. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how to ask the question. Like, I don't even know how to get back out of this.
So here.
Back button. I don't know. There's not one here.
No, because you're in a shooting mode. So here, let me take a
Okay.
look for you. So at the current moment, let's turn this guy. Let's hit. That's the record button. So what you are clicking.
I don't want to. I think was it when I was in mode? Is that what I no? Oh, that's right. I was.
So to start off, when you're in the mode button, so
Yep.
after you click mode,
Mhm.
if you click info, it'll switch you between video and then your photo. Video has the same exact setup, so shutter priority, aperture priority, manual,
Got it.
program, and then all the other threes that you can then choose, plus regular.
Okay.
Clicking menu or info, or clicking the info button one more time brings you back into shooting mode,
Okay.
and so that's how you're able to tell. So
Okay.
record, that'll start this guy, and it's when you click this button immediately, it'll start recording just what it's saying there, movie recording in Auto Plus record quality.
Okay. So we were recording something right there.
Mm-hmm.
Would I go into the playback button to?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's right there.
And I can erase it because I obviously don't need that, right? So just hit erase.
Mhm.
Okay. Now that's interesting. So you just hit the cue set in order versus the touchscreen. This is
No,
very basic.
I didn't click anything there. All I did was click this button, and then when it was time, I then clicked this. Oh, yes, I get what you're saying. I then went here, and then I clicked the center button.
Okay,
'Cause this
that-
is still the same command dial. This is still
Gotcha.
your buttons to control the swipe.
Right.
This is just your set button, your OK button, or when they say press Q, that's when they're saying press Q.
Are they saying press key?
And they'll say it sometimes on there.
Okay.
For example, we don't have it here, but let's go.
That's okay. That's all right. Let's stay here. So here's a question. So 690 out of 690. So this is and over
Yep.
here 100 and then the very first image.
Mhm.
So I know that that's the first image because it's the first image I
Mhm.
took. What's the 100?
That I don't actually know.
So essentially, I've taken 694 images.
Yes.
So why is that?
That's how many photos are living on the camera. That's your shutter count right now. That's how many photos you've taken so far with this one.
So why isn't it say 694?
You've deleted 4 of those photos. That is your true shutter
Oh,
count. As
got
far as
it.
the 100, I don't honestly know what that stands for.
Oh gosh, I've erased more than 4 images.
Could be.
Like I just erased probably 10 or 12 just because I did that and I got rid of them all.
Let's see. It's still showing me that same count. Here, I'll end this video and then I can Google it for you.
Okay.
Because that's really what it all kind of